Continuing with layers, one of the topics we didn't get to was layer comps. Layer comps are really useful when you have a lot of layers in your project and you want to be able to preview certain combinations of layers on versus layers off, or different effects applied to layers. And what layer comps allow us to do is we can save different states of our project. So instead of arranging where, in this case, I have 3 layers and all layers are turned on, maybe I want a version of my project where I just have this layer, but I don't want those layers currently active. Layer comps allow me to actually do that and a little bit more without having to make separate files. So when I'm working on a client project and have a lot of different layers, so I may want to show them version A of the layout. Then I want to show them version B. Then I want to show them version C. Then I want to do more to it. And we can store all of these different combinations, which sometimes are related to colors, sometimes related to artwork, sometimes related to styles and effects. And we can store them all within one document as just different comps. So it's really easy to cycle through those different states without having different documents that we're working with. So the way that we get into layer comps first is we go under Window, and then you will see that there's an option for layer comps. I pull up layer comps, there it is. Now what I can do is say I want to, my first layer comp will be red, so I'm going to click there, call that red. Now what we're able to keep track of is we can keep track of a layer's visibility, which is the layer is turned on or off. We can keep track of the position of artwork on layers, and we can even keep track of layer styles that have been applied to a given layer. So I'll hit OK. Now, turn on blue. I'm going to add in a new comp here. Call this one blue. Now we'll turn on yellow. If I add in a new comp, call this yellow ring. Now if we hit this little circle with arrows on it, that updates the state to the current settings. Now if I cycle through, by going to the red state, we can see how it now is keeping track of that change. If I go to the blue state, if I go to the yellow ring state, which I realize I still misspelled despite doing it, so we'll fix that. Now what's really cool about it is I could go onto that ring. I could, oh, that's an ugly style. Oh, that's really ugly too. We'll go with this. So now there's my yellow ring. And now if I update it to that, we will see these style effects have been applied to it. But if I go back to my red state, you'll notice down here those style effects don't even show up because they're not part of that state. If I go to my blue state, we can see that, again, the style effects aren't there. Now if I pull the blue over so we see some blue and red, I can update this state to that current status. What's there. Now if I go back to red, there's red. We can see blue is back to its original position. If I go here, we can see blue has been moved. If I go here, we have that. So our layer comps allow us to save a layer's visibility, the layers turned on or off. It allows us to save effects or styles that have been applied to a layer and a layer's position. If I go back to the blue state, and I scribble on that layer. Now if I go to yellow, you can see that by making a pixel change, I actually changed the pixels on this layer. I erased pixels. That's carrying through between the different states. So it's those properties that are numerical based properties, which are layers, styles, or effects, position, and visibility. It's an on-off thing. That can all be maintained with layer states. So if I wanted to have a state where I have two versions of this blue one, instead of having the blue filled with so instead of where the blue is cut out, what I would really want to do, update that so I know it's done, is take this layer and I would duplicate that layer. So in this case I use Command J, which adds a duplicate of a layer. So it added a duplicate of that layer. I could now turn off the layer that I want to leave solid. And now if I use the eraser, okay, scribble on that one. So we update blue's state. But now if I go back to red, we'll see there's red, that layer's missing. If I go back to yellow, sorry, I broke my palette. You can see it's now been updated. It has the ring. The layer with the erasing has been turned off because it's not part of this state. But we can see that we have this other layer, the correct one, in place. So if we want to have layers with pixel changes between comps, we do need duplicate layers, but then this controls which one we're seeing between each comp state. So it's a really cool way of working because we're able to preserve these different states. So if I want to show the client option A, option B, and option C, we can do that. And it works really, really well for it. Important to remember that if you modify a layer state, so if I take and move this over, so I've now moved that chunk over, I'm going to turn off my gradient overlay. So we've made it different. I'm like, that's great. Now I click through to one of my other layer comps or layer states. When I go back, it does not remember it. So if I want this change to take effect and I want this change to be remembered, I do have to remember to update the comp. Either update visibility, update position, update effects, or just update everything. So when I do that, it's now been updated. So now when I go here, go back to that, go here, it remembers what I've done. Next order of business to talk about is moving into our working with images, and one of the things we're going to do is getting rid of red eye. Red eye is one of those things that a lot of cameras can do automatically now. You can upload your pictures if you use iPhoto on your computer. iPhoto can just automatically do it. Some cameras have built-in settings with dubious results. A lot of software does it pretty automatically. We could do it old school if you want to get rid of the red eye as it shows up in old school. What we would typically do is add in a layer, then you're going to choose a color to work with. You can work with black, you can do dark purple, and then you use a squishy brush, you paint in a mark, and we'll notice how it made his eyes look really, really dark. But what we can then do is take that layer, we can multiply it in, maybe pull the opacity down a little bit. Probably should have made my brush a little smaller, so we'll even do that, shrink the brush down. But what it requires when you use this method for doing it is getting back the highlight. So as we've gotten rid of the red eye, so it looks a little more natural. The eyes don't have that glossy appearance. So then what we need to do is to go in and pull back where the highlight is on the eye. So you pull back a little bit of that highlight so the eyes start to look a little more natural with it. So you can spend a lot of time finessing it. Brown eyes are easier than blue eyes because blue eyes you have to preserve more of the blue, otherwise it just makes the eyes look really, really dark. And it used to be in a time and place that's what we would do to get rid of red eye. Now we have a red eye tool built into Photoshop, which is just pretty much cheating, because I go into it and I can just click and it gets rid of the red eye, and boom, it's done. It maintained the highlight, didn't have to do a whole lot. Now we can decide, is this too much or too little? So we can play with the settings here, and I can pull it down if I don't want to darken it quite so much and leave it a little bit less. But we can see that even the automatic tool, while it's maintaining the highlight easier, it darkened it, it is removing a lot of the brown of his eyes. So it's not a perfect solution. And when we're doing corrections, it's something that we have to just be aware of what's happening when we do it and how is it working as it factors into it. And even using a tool is not going to be foolproof. It's not, oh, I'm done, I used the tool, and well, that's what the tool did and I have to live with it. But perhaps we need to adjust it a little bit to figure out how to get it a little bit better. And it's okay, but it is really darkening it quite a bit, and we're losing the brown around his eyes. And I would suspect part of that is because if we look at the eye, what red eye is doing is it's trying to find that red color. And it sees the brown around here and goes, well, brown has red in it. So will I darken out the brown? Oh, or the red, that brown must be part of the red eye, so we'll make that go dark as well. And that's part of, by automating this, it's starting to fail. So this is one of those instances where doing it a little bit more, oh, wrong layer. Doing it more by hand is going to probably give us a better result. So painting it in. And then go back and reclaim the highlight, because that's now maintaining more of the color, and then it's just going to be a matter of finding those highlights and use a very small eraser so it doesn't grab the red. So we can see that got rid of it. Pretty good. We see a pupil, but he still has brown in his eyes. But if we look at it this way and now use the red eye tool, we can compare doing it automatically. And you'll see that there's a subtle, it maintains more brown by doing it by hand, which is a little more truthful. So even though we have tools that we can use that automate this process, you click a button, one click, chopping, you're done. That's not always going to be your best solution. Sometimes you do have to go old school and decide to paint it, erase out. The number one failure if you hand correct red eye is not maintaining the highlight, so then the eyes look very dead. So you usually have to bring back that little highlight where the light is gleaming, because the eye is a wet surface, so the light, we get the red eye because the flash is now reflecting off of the back of the cornea. But the surface is wet and reflects back, gives us a specular highlight that we need to maintain. So it's that wet reflection on the flash, that little spot, that makes the eye look real and three-dimensional. To create your panorama pictures, this is where we let Photoshop do all the heavy lifting. So I'll go under Automate, and then we'll see that we have different things that we can work with. So we can choose Photo Merge, and we can tell it what kind of thing we want. We can say auto, where it's going to do its best guess. And we can blend all the images together. I'm going to browse through and use the graciously provided photos. So I have a bunch of photos here. And I hit OK. And now we wait. So after it has gone through the process of stitching the pictures together, and what it's doing is it's going to be doing a little bit of kind of content-aware blending. It's doing some masking, some rotation of files. If you kept your camera real steady and straight on the tripod, it doesn't have to do a lot of rotational elements. If you're holding the camera by hand and not using a tripod, you will probably see there's a lot more rotation of the pictures that has to take place to try and get things lined up. But then after it's occurred, we can see where it applied a mask to each layer, and it's now created this very seamless picture, unless I look at the top or bottom of the image. So it shows me I'm going to need to do some cropping to get rid of that, the top or bottom. But as I work my way across the picture, it was able to create a continuous image. Now this can be a really useful technique, because now I can create an image that works well in the background of something. I can use it in a video, and I can just manually reposition this image, creating the illusion of the camera itself is panning across my frame. So I can create some cool effects in After Effects. I can do some really neat web animations where I can load this as a big image in the background and just have it scrolling across, and it looks like there's video playing, but it's just one image, which then cuts down on the file size. And I can do creative things for animation, where this can now be a background element inside an animation project. But it does require me to clean the edges. Now, if I don't want to crop my image, if I were to add in a new layer, we could zoom in, and then I can start to work with either the patch tool, or I can work with the clone stamp tool. So I can try and use these tools to move things around to give it a better result. But my recommendation is your time will be better spent of using crop and just knocking it down to the smallest size. So figure out where something comes in at the edge, pull in your edges, and that's going to be probably the best use of your time. And then looking through the whole thing to make sure. And it looks like we need to pull the top down a little bit more. Pull the right side in. So once I've done that, I now have a cropped image. I can crop it down, and now there is no problems occurring at the edges. You will run into problems when you do your panorama with certain kinds of images, how close things are to you. If everything you're capturing in the panorama is far enough away from you, you don't get a lot of geometric distortions. But if you're standing right up against a tree or a building or other thing, as you pull the panorama, you can sometimes get some weird distortions that occur with the perspective that then will need some correction after the fact to be able to make it work a little bit better. With the photo merge completed, with it cropped down to get rid of the crap at the top and bottom, and there are more settings that you can play with when you do the photo merge, and I would encourage you to do some trials of different things. And we just went with auto. Certain images you will want to choose other settings. You get to figure out what's going to work best for you. But now that I have this, if I want to do something where I'm working on a individual layer, cloning, or anything else, and either I make a new layer But another thing I can do is, if I want to modify the pixels itself and not worry about which frame of this that is currently active when I'm trying to copy things or paint or adjust or fix, is if I hit Command A, select all, and then under Edit I'm going to choose Copy Merged, and that takes a copy as if my image were flat. So remember, we always want to maintain our layers when we're working in Photoshop. We want to have access to the layers so that we can always go back and fix things as needed. So instead of flattening my image and working with it, I can now choose Copy Merged. It's also Command Shift C. So when I do that, now if I paste, just a standard paste, it pasted it in. So if I turn off every layer but that one, we'll see that it's now one flat layer containing the image as if it is now flat. Now we can certainly go in and add in other adjustments. So if I want to jack this up, make the colors really pop and really stick up the vibrance a little bit, the saturation a little, we'll see that we can do before after, how it really gives the grass, gives the car a lot more richness in the photo. I'm not entirely sold on where my greens are. So I can pull the greens down a little bit. I want to take my blues and add them in a little bit more. So we have some flexibility that we can do with our curves. We can work with our vibrance and start to modify the image to get it to have an almost surreal, hyper-real color attached into it. And if we let Photoshop do the heavy lifting, we don't have to take all of these pictures and try to figure out how to blend their edges and put it together. Because if I were trying to do that, and I will just take a couple pictures here. Just trying to find a pair that will. So if I look at this picture plus this picture and want them to line up, so copy this one. So if I look, you can see that it's going to be a little bit tricky lining these two pictures up. So Photoshop did quite a bit of work lining it up. Now if I choose multiply, I can use that as a way to start to try and line it up. And it's getting close, but it's at this edge over here and where the words are lining up. So it really did a pretty good job when we look at it of lining things up. But what I may end up wanting to do is to do a little bit of adjustment. Now, what I hit, get out of here, is I hit Command T for free transform. So that's edit free transform. Now, if I hold down the Command key, I can just move one corner, getting a cool, flexible movement. So what I'm trying to do is to line up the edge of Hennepin Technical right there. And we can see how that starts to line up my image. return. Now if we just go back to normal, we'll see that the two images are starting to line up. And if I slide it over a little bit more, so we're moving them over, we can see how space is starting to change and curve. So if I were to grab the next image in the sequence, I would repeat that process and keep stacking it. But now I look up here and see, oh, look at the sky. The sky isn't the same from picture 1 to picture 2. So that means then picture 1 up here, I need to go through and put in a layer mask. Go grab a big squishy brush and soften up that edge to try and blend the sky. But we can see how it requires quite a bit of finessing to make it work. The whole image is a little bit darker, so maybe on this whole frame we need to even go through and a little bit of an exposure correction. Lighten it up a little bit. Might help. Maybe even a little bit of that will make it only affect that image. Now do exposure. Lighten it up. Add in levels. So with the level adjustment, looks like I really should have done my levels first, then the two line up. But as you can see, doing this by hand, if I have 20 pictures, and I'm trying to get each one to line up to create a long panorama, it's a lot of work. And it's going to be really challenging to do that. And then I compare that to telling Photoshop that, okay, give me a panorama. Took about 3 minutes worth of time for it to open the files, process them, and be done. Pick your battles. To me, it makes sense to let the tool do that, but I think it's good to understand really what is happening. And what is happening is the computer is going through and analyzing the images, and it's doing warping on each image to try and get the pieces to line up. And then it's trying to balance the colors so there's a seamless transition of color to color to color as it works its way across your image. That's what it did to create the panorama. So you could do it by hand, but it's going to take you a lot more time and effort to do so. So if I have a family photo and we need to change things, so I have picture 7, picture 9, I'm going to just do some reworking on the heads in this location. Now, what I can do is if I know I only need, in this case, I want to swap out this head with this one where the eyes are open. They're not looking at the camera, but at least they're open, so that's an improvement. Now, to do that, and this is not uncommon when you take pictures of groups that you have, you take a bunch in quick succession so that you have things to work with. So if your camera has a burst mode where you push the button, it'll take like 3, 6, or 10 pictures, you do that because then you say smile, da, 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 and it just takes a whole burst of pictures. So then if their eyes were open or closed, you can find the ones that worked. That's a nice way to do it. I haven't figured out where burst mode is on that new camera, so I'm still kind of discovering. So I look here, I'm like, oh, right, that's not working. Need to change that. So if I want to replace this head with the other one, quick and dirty way is I can make a selection. So I can just make a selection and I can go and grab a head, copy that, click over to the other file, paste, and you can move it over and line things up. Now, again, if you've taken pictures in quick succession, it's going to get pretty close at lining things up. because the background is the same, the rest of the figure is the same, we're able to kind of create that illusion. Now I can say I need to delete a little bit in the sweatshirt area on the red sweatshirt to get rid of that. So I can either use the eraser tool to erase parts of it, or I can go through with a mask and apply a mask into it. So if I know I'm just swapping out one head, that can be a pretty easy way of working. If I need to swap out more heads, because I really don't like what's happened to the mouth there hanging open, so I want to get rid of or bring that face over. Now, if getting things aligned, generally you're moving it around anyway, so it's not as critical of I need things aligned. Otherwise, you can always copy a whole image, paste in the whole image. But if you notice, the image rotated because I wasn't on a tripod. So because of that, putting in the whole image, the bricks aren't going to be quite right. So it's going to take a little bit of work to line it up. Now, if I switch over and try some of my different blending modes, because sometimes we'll use something like multiply to look through, and then when we get rid of the double image on things that we know we want the same, that helps to line it up. We can also just lower the opacity, and then we start to see, if we zoom in, we'll see where it's fuzzy on things, and it will get crisper as I line it up. But we can also go with difference, and I can see where now this particular layer, if I rotate, you see either the bricks disappear, the lines. So if I can find just that sweet spot, now go back to normal. Okay, now it's lined up the rotation. So what I did is I used my layer blending mode of difference so that it shows color when the colors, as they mix, don't line up. And as I rotated until the image effectively turned black, which meant there was no difference between the two images except in people's faces. And by doing that, I was able to see, okay, that tells me that face, the hands here, we can see that there was definite movement between picture 1 and picture 2. The shirt shifted a little bit on the hat there. This person has moved virtually nothing. A little bit on the bricks there. If I go up, let's try to find, I'm using the arrow keys to move over a pixel at a time to see, can I even further get rid of things. So now it looks like my background in the brick area, the background over here, it's all getting really, or if I rotate a lot, we can see how now we see the difference. So what I'm trying to do is go until everything in the background disappears. And I had it for a moment and then I lost it. Okay, so that's pretty close. So now when it's back to a normal layer, alright, it was better before. Let's go back to, alright, pretty close. And somewhere around here. Alright, so it's going to be close enough. So that lines it up. Now I just need to grab a head. So I can use the lasso tool. Oh wait, no, I don't need to use the lasso tool. Actually, I could use the lasso tool. Select this head right here. do a mask. That now brings back the rest of the group so we can see it's covering up that head. Clean up the edges on that. I've now substituted in the head. So this way I'm not doing any deletion of pixels, where the previous method I copied pixels from one file, pasted them into the other file. This time I have all the pixels in one from both images in one file, and I'm using a mask. And we'll be talking next week more specifically about masks and channels and the power that goes along with that, and doing it and paths. And so pretty much these three things we'll look at in much greater detail next week. But right now, working with this mask, you can just clean it up. We can see I was able to bring over and substitute in the head. Oh, we need, gotta go. Looks like I still need to get rid of. There you go. I had my brush. Whenever you're working with your brushes, whether it's a paintbrush, the eraser etch set as a brush, you can modify the opacity by using the number keys. So if I type in 0, it's 100%. If I type in 1, we see the brush opacity goes down to 10%. 5, I'm at 50%. If I type in 76 quickly, not 7, then 6, but 76, it now set the opacity of my brush to 76%. So you can not only make your brush get bigger and smaller by using the square bracket keys, you can control the opacity of your brush. So in this case, when I'm painting on a mask, it's painting in variations of gray. And I'm able to then set that by typing in the number keys on the keyboard. So now if I had earlier when I was doing some work with the mask during the earlier demo, set it to 20%. So I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working anymore. It's like, oh yeah, I need to put the brush opacity back to 100. So now it cleans it up around the head here, tightens that mask up, and we can see. So now we've taken and fixed someone's face. The features that they added into Photoshop a few versions back is called Content Aware. And with Content Aware, they have integrated it into a couple of different tools. So we do have the Content Aware patch tool here, or move tool, so that if I have something on a layer or a selection, I can move things around, and it's trying to figure out what to do. So it tried to fill the hole. All of these content aware options are going to be really image specific on what works best. Now if I just use a simple lasso and lasso around this head and hit delete, it gives me an option where it wants to now fill this with, and I can choose content aware. I can choose to fill with my foreground or background color, because if I have even a new file, and on this file, if I have a selection and hit delete, okay, what do I want to fill with? Content aware, well, white, that's not going to do a whole lot. I could choose to fill with the background color. Okay, so now it filled it with pink. But on images where there's something there, now if I delete and don't fill with the background color, but instead choose content aware, it's going to analyze what's there, and it said, hey look, I see brick over here, and it got close, but we can see a few of the bricks it didn't line up quite right. So it got close. Content aware pattern matching works well on areas that don't have a lot of detail. Grass, sand, dirt, sky. So if you take a picture and there's an airplane in the picture of the blue sky and you don't want the airplane, highlight the airplane, hit delete, content to where delete will go, oh, here, I'll just fill it with blue sky, done. And it will match the sky and it will look seamless. It'll be perfect. If there's a tree in your landscape, hit delete, boom, it's gone. It's really easy to do things. Now here, getting rid of this head, it's close, but it's not perfect because we can see how the lines didn't line up. Now, one thing about content aware delete is it only works on the background layer. So if this image is not a background layer, one of those special kinds of layers in Photoshop, but if this image is then just a layer, so now it's just the background, this is my copy. Now if I try and do this, I just get a hole. So content aware delete, where it fills in and tries to match it, only works when it's a background layer. That's one of the key things. And that's where we can use then the content move tool. I could move his head up. Say, okay, we'll put the head up there. What do we get in between? All right, it actually matched the brick pretty good. And now we've got a floating decapitated head, which is kind of fun. It's like a completely headless student. I like that. That's good.
There's something you can do to make
Content aware only goes so far. If I want to patch and cover this head and have the bricks still perfectly look like bricks, sometimes what might be worthwhile is to drag over some bricks. Now if I've done this, we'll see that now the brick lines are starting to line up a little bit better. And I should have made that layer before I drag them over because I don't want it to be on that. So if I add in a layer and now if I and then we can move over this chunk. Now, currently it's a little big. Need to make it a little bit smaller. And if I even erase some of the edges of the bricks to figure out which ones to get whole bricks, and I could use the layer mask so that I have a little flexibility while I am doing this. Now, when I'm trying to blend in a patch like this, it's going to work best, in this case, with a softer edge brush. If my brush that I'm working with is a hard edge brush, we don't get as matched of a seam. So if my brush has a hardness set at 100, then when I do this, we don't get that softer edge, which makes it easier to finesse what we're doing. So generally, when you are trying to blend a patch, a softer brush is going to give you a better result. And then we can bring back the line of the mortar right there. Goes all the way across. And now this poor student has lost his head. It was a rough semester. Perspective warp, if I go and grab a picture. Now if we go under that pull down menu, you will see that we have an option for perspective warp. We've been using free transform quite a bit. Command T, that should just be, you shouldn't even think. You're like, oh, I want to scale, rotate, or skew this image. Boom, Command T. You don't even think twice about it. You just do. Because that's what Command T does. You don't even have to select the layer. If you're on a layer, whatever that layer is, Command T, it's going to turn that layer into a modifiable layer. But right now we're going to look at perspective warp. It says step 1, we can watch the little animation. Click and drag to define the plane. Snap 2 or more planes together to define corners. And then once we've done that, then we are able to move on to step 2. So I'll close that out of there. So step 1, I'm going to define the front edge of the train. Now that I've done that, I drew my box. Now I can adjust the perspective. What I'm looking at is the lines in the train. I'm looking at these lines in the train and trying to line things up. I'm even going to choose something that's easier to work with or follow. This train has a rounded front, so it's not completely flat across here, so there's a little bit of guessing going on. But if I pull this up thinking, oh, I need the bottom up here, I notice that this line through the image is not really lining up with these other lines. So that tells me that that's probably incorrect. Because the first thing we want to do is we want to get the planes set with our image so that when we move into the next step, we'll be able to warp our image. Okay, so now I draw a second plane. And now I can take and move that plane over. And notice how when I move the plane over, it gives me this beautiful blue line indicating it's going to join these two. Now that they're joined, I'm going to continue drawing the box in my image. Now I don't have to go all the way to the end of the train. And I think I might want to pull the whole thing and use that so I can just line up along the train car. Because what I'm doing is trying to first establish what is the current perspective in my image. And then I'm going to warp it. And here's a vertical I can use there. So if I can figure out what works in my image and get that lined up, then I will be able to warp this. So I just have to get part of the train done. I don't have to go all the way down to the back end. Because once I have this, then I can modify it. So now I click over to warp, and now we can watch the little animation here. It says move the pins to manipulate my perspective. Okay, cool. So now if I pull this down, we'll see how starting to, actually I guess I should have gone further down in the train and over. My bad. That's, we'll go down. I thought I didn't have to go all the way over, but apparently it wants me to. So once I have these boxed in, my line's boxed in a little bit. Now click over to warp. So it can really start to compress down our space in a fairly dramatic manner. You'll notice how the whole image is being manipulated. So now I'm creating the perspective warp of this train is wider. It's a double wide. You can shorten it up a little bit. If the train were on its own layer, it wouldn't affect the background, and then we could rework the background. And then once I'm happy with it, click the check mark. That's okay. Now, if I paste back in a copy of the original, we can see before, after, so we can see how the train is dramatically shrinking. If I get rid of the other stuff in the background, we really could have a smaller train, but you'll notice how, and this is what's useful about the perspective warp is we can now correct for bad angles with the camera. We can correct for just bad images in general. But through very subtle manipulation, we can now tweak the perspective to make it a little bit more dramatic or a little less dramatic if we start to flatten it out. But it gives you some options to manipulate your image. And that's what it really is about, is doing manipulations. We need to be doing that, being aware of why. What are we trying to achieve? What effect do we want? What end result? How do we want people to perceive that finished artwork? That's really what it's about. Because Photoshop gives us amazing options, but we need to use them with some responsibility. We need to think about the why are we doing this? What is our hope? What are we trying to achieve with it?